bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, with all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could reach us between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices between our divisions, with all of our voices between our divisions, with all of our voices and all our visions, with all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sunday worship at the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa, or FirstU. My name is Guy, and I'm delighted to be your worship associate this morning. Whether you're watching this worship service on your phone, tablet, computer, or TV, from the comfort of your home or from somewhere else, wherever you may connect, whenever you may connect, you are welcome here. We acknowledge that our FirstU campus is located on traditional, unsurrendered, and unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and that the work of reconciliation is a responsibility of our congregation and of all Canadians. Our goal is to educate ourselves and all who have ears to hear, to be of service to those who are at risk, and to advocate for justice. Do take care and take advantage of online opportunities at FirstU to stay in touch during this protracted pandemic. If you are new to FirstU and would like to learn more about us, please contact us through our email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa.ca. Following our service, please join us as well for hospitality hour, except not today. Today there is a special event. And now here is Casey from our board with announcements for today, which will include something about that special event.
Hi, folks. It's Casey here from the board coming to you this morning. Thank you for welcoming me into your homes. The first thing I want to mention is that the CUC is actually offering a series of 4 leadership courses. Now, I say leadership, but it's open to those who are even leadership curious. It's 4 sessions long, like I said, and it's from 4 to 6 p.m. and I believe it's on Sundays. So if you're interested in that, it's called Serving with Spirit, Nurturing UU Leaders. Please contact the CUC directly, or if you don't know how to do that, you can also contact Lisa Sharp. She'll be happy to give you information about that. Yes, so after the service today, there's a special campus planning town hall. We really hope that all of you are aware of it by now, and we do hope that you'll join us. We're going to be talking about some really important things, and we really want your feedback on a lot of it too. So please join us after the service at 11:30 for that town hall event. And that's it from me today.
Thank you very much, Casey. During this continuing pandemic, we encourage you to sign up to receive the EUU, our weekly email newsletter, and to check our Facebook and Instagram pages and our webpage for notices and updates. Our calendar continues to be as full as ever, albeit much of it online. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love, and however you identify, today you are part of our spiritual community.
Thank you, Guy, Casey. Bonjour, mes amis. Good morning, one and all. We are here together on this bright mid-January Sunday morning. It's a little chilly out there, huh? The fog is lifting over the Ottawa River. It is a spectacular January Sunday morning. I'm the Reverend Eric Meter, and I'm honored to serve this faith community. We light our chalice this morning to these words adapted from those by my colleague, Eric Walker Wickstrom. When we light our chalice, everyone focuses on the flame, yet it is the paraffin of the candle, the cotton of the wick, and the oxygen in the air around us that makes the flame possible. As leaders, we are not called to be a lone beacon on a hill. Rather, we are meant to work together so that we might together shine. Our chalice is lit, and now Music Jen will introduce our opening hymn.
Hello. The first hymn today, "Come and Go With Me," is an African American spiritual, and as a white person, I try to be very thoughtful about performing this music. In my childhood, it was so often the for fun choral music that you would end a concert with, and so I wanted to start out today by saying that it is, of course, not for fun music, but a serious, powerful, and beautiful vocal tradition that is born out of the enslavement of Africans, and it is part of a tradition of music that is about the sort of systemic racism and oppression that I have benefited from in my life. So rather than avoiding singing spirituals out of feeling guilty, I try to perform them intentionally and to give them context and a place in history, to use it as a chance to acknowledge my privilege and also to acknowledge the struggles, the challenges, and the resilience of Black people in America and here in Canada as well, where they face many of the same struggles. So here we go. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
Thank you, Music Jen. That was absolutely lovely and a great way to kick things off. Our call to worship this morning is adapted from words by Gretchen Haley. Cast your vision here in the middle of the hardest moment, the turning of so much that is new. This life with so much worth saving, this fragile faith, for the children born now into the world as it is, with the threat of war and whole continents burning still, while the memory lingers of holidays chaotic and miraculous. Into this day, offer the vision you've tried to talk yourself down from, your wildest dream, your audacious aims, the beauty that whispers to you to follow, to build, and become. For this world coming undone by distraction and greed and fear, this world divided by made-up borders, fake fights, and all that needs forgiveness. Here, stir up your steadfast hope, your resolute clarity of what remains possible. Be generous with your dreaming and brave. All paths to the future are born in this courage of imagination, this willingness to shed, to salvage, to start again. To be this blessing for each other, to be this blessed. Come, let us worship together.
I am the Reverend Ellen Bell. I am the spiritual care visitor for this congregation. And at this time in the service, we take the opportunity to talk about people's personal joys and sorrows. We do this by placing stones in water and allowing the ripples to take the wishes out into the universe, where people may either commiserate or congratulate. Today, we are talking a lot about the Omicron variant that is going around. I myself have had it, so I'll give myself a stone. Andrew and Mariella apparently are not doing well in it, hopefully better now. Lisa and Eric have had difficulties with this Omicron as well, and apparently many staff members. I do not know all the names, and I'm equally sure that there are many members of the congregation who are dealing with Omicron at this time, because it seems to be just about everywhere. And I hope those who are dealing with it are not having too rough a time. I had a request from Carmen to recognize the 3 children who were killed in a fire in the Sandy Lake First Nation this past week. May our hearts go with them. One last stone to recognize all the sorrows that are kept in our hearts. We will now have a moment of silence.
Hi everyone, it's Nao, your Director of Religious Exploration. I hope everyone's having a really great Sunday. Today I'm reading to you a story and it's titled The Oldest Student, How Mary Walker Learned to Read. It's written by Rita, Hubbard. It's a story that Reverend Eric shared for this Sunday service. Whenever young Mary Walker was tired, she would shield her eyes from the sun and watch the swallow-tailed kites dip and soar above the trees. That must be what it's like to be free, she thought. But Mary didn't watch for long. Even at only 8 years old, she knew the first rule of the Union Springs, Alabama plantation she lived on. She knew the second rule too. Slaves should not be taught to read or write or do anything that might help them learn to do so. Mary didn't stop working. She didn't learn to read either. But at the end of each long day, picking cotton, toting water to Papa and the other slaves who chopped wood for the main tracks, or helping Mama clean the big house, she would lie in her little bed next to the crumbling fireplace and think about those birds. When I'm free, I'll go where I want and rest when I want, and I'll learn to read too. When she was 15, it happened. Mary and her mother, brothers, and sisters were free. The Emancipation Proclamation said so. What it didn't say was how a family with nothing except the tattered garments on their backs could find food, clothes, and a place to sleep. Mary's father had died, and the family was on its own. Across fields and through woods, ex-slaves surged like waves, crashing hard to shore. Now that they were free, every road was Freedom Road. Many headed north and west and every which way, searching for long-lost family members or simply experiencing the wonder of being free. Others, like Mary, chose to stay in the South. An organization called the Freedom Bureau helped those who stayed to find shelter on an abandoned Confederate land. Mary and her family settled in a one-room cabin, and for the next few years, she worked alongside her mama to help feed her siblings. 7 days a week, she churned butter, cleaned houses, and cared for other folks' children. The hours were long, and if Mary was thirsty or hungry or needed to use the outhouse, she had to wait until she got home. At week's end, she would offer Mama the one lonely quarter she had earned. One day, Mary met a group of evangelists on the roadside. A woman with soft wrinkles in her kindly face placed a big, beautiful Bible in Mary's hand and told her, "Your civil rights are in these pages." Mary didn't know what civil rights were. She only knew that top to bottom, front to back, that book was filled with words. "I'm going to learn to read those words," she vowed, "but not today. Today, there was work to be done. And tomorrow too." When Mary got married, she and her husband worked as sharecroppers, renting someone else's house, using someone else's tools, and planting someone else's seeds to farm land they would never own. And they harvested the crops. Almost all day, all the money they earned went to pay for the housing, tool, and seed costs. Mary was 20 years old when her first son was born. She opened her Bible and marveled at the squiggles inside. There had been no time to learn to read. A friend wrote Mary's son's birthday in the Bible, August 26, 1869. Then Mary dipped a pen into an inkwell and made her mark beside it. Not a letter, not a name, just a mark. It was the best she could do. One day, Mary's husband died. She married again, and a second son was born. Then a third. Mary made marks for these sons too. She had 3 growing boys. More money, that's what we need, Mary thought. But the only other jobs available to Black women were as maids or nannies or cooks. The hours were long, with only half a day on Saturdays, and like sharecropping, they didn't pay much. Mary sighed. Words would have to wait. For the next 4 decades, Mary sharecropped and did odd jobs to support her family. In 1917, Mary's family moved to the little city of Chateauguay, Tennessee. It was the year of the Great Flood. The story was in all the newspapers, but Mary could only study the pictures to understand what had happened. By now, Mary was 68 and too old to sharecrop, but she continued to work cooking, cleaning, and babysitting. She also fried fish, baked cakes, and sold sandwiches to raise money for her church. On Sundays, she would sit in the congregation, and as the preacher spoke, she would clutch her family Bible, the Bible she couldn't read. When Mary was well past 90, she and her husband sat in their creaky rockers while one or the other of their sons read to them. After the 2 younger boys died, the eldest read. Then Mary's husband died. Several years later, her eldest son died too. She was 94. Mary had outlived her entire family. She was 114 years old and alone. "Can't read," she said. "Can't write. I don't know anything." Mary stood at the window of her retirement home and gazed down at the world below. Words were everywhere, on billboards, on buildings, on store windows and trucks. She sighed. All this time, she thought, and they still look like squiggles. Mary had heard about a new reading class held in her building. She pursed her lips. No more waiting, she decided. Time to learn. Out of her apartment, into an elevator, and down to the lobby she went. When the elevator doors sprang open, Mary saw people sitting under a sign with a picture of an open book. She could not read the words. A neighbor walked up to her. "There's reading class, Miss Mary. Can I help you over?" Mary shook her head. Then she gripped her cane, lifted her chin, and walked straight toward that sign. For the next year and more, Mary put everything she had into learning to read. It wasn't easy. After all, she was the oldest student in the class, and probably in the entire country. Could someone her age learn to read? She didn't know, but by God, she was going to try. She studied the alphabet until her eyes watered. She memorized the sounds each letter made and practiced writing her name so many times that her fingers cramped. She learned to recognize sight words and then challenged herself to make short sentences with them. She studied and studied until books and pages and letters and words swirled in her head while she slept. One day, Mary's hard work paid off. She could read. Words of her accomplishment traveled, and people everywhere celebrated with her. The mayor's, newspaper journalists across the country, and a man from the USD Department of Education who said, "Miss Mary Walker, I pronounce you the nation's oldest student," all shared her joy. Mary felt complete. She still missed her sons, but whenever she was lonely, she read from her Bible or looked out her window and read the words on the street below. From then on, Chateauguay honored Mary's achievements with yearly birthday parties. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson sent well wishes on Mary's 118th birthday, and in 1969, President Richard Nixon did the same. Mary was now 121 years old. Mary received many gifts over the years: a radio, a sofa, her very first television, a new Bible, and the key to the city, and perfume and champagne from the Canadian Mounties. She also received something that brought her back those long days in the Alabama cotton fields, her first airplane ride. From the cockpit window, Mary gazed at the trees and rooftops below. No different than a horse and buggy ride, she joked, but she knew it was. As the airplanes dipped and soared like those swallow-tailed kites of a long ago, Mary decided that flying was a lot like reading. They both made a body feel as free as a bird. Each year before her birthday celebration came to an end, someone would whisper, "Let's listen to Miss Mary." The shuffling and movement would fade away until not a sound was heard. Then Mary would stand on her old legs, clear her old throat, and read from her Bible or her school book in a voice that was clear and strong. When she finished, she would gently close her book and say, "You're never too old to learn." Hope everyone has a great Sunday. Please check the EUU for RE updates. We do have outdoor RE sessions going on, so please look at the EUU where you can find out some details about what we'll be doing. Thanks, bye.
While Reverend Eric will shortly offer some reflections on the 93rd anniversary of the birth of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., our readings this morning are from Canadian efforts towards justice. From the 2015 summary of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Getting to the truth was hard, but getting to reconciliation will be harder. It requires that the paternalistic and racist foundations of the residential school system be rejected as the basis for an ongoing relationship. Reconciliation requires that a new vision, based on a commitment to mutual respect, be developed. It also requires an understanding that the most harmful impacts of residential schools have been the loss of pride and self-respect of Aboriginal people, and the lack of respect that non-Aboriginal people have been raised to have for their Aboriginal neighbors. Reconciliation is not an Aboriginal problem, it is a Canadian one. Virtually all aspects of Canadian society may need to be reconsidered. This summary is intended to be the initial reference point in that important discussion. Reconciliation will take some time. That was from the preface, page 6. An excerpt from the report. In the residential schools, students' hearts were hardened. Rick Gilbert remembered the Williams Lake, British Columbia school as a loveless place. That was one thing about this school, was that when you got hurt or got beat up or something and you started crying, nobody comforted you. You just sat in the corner and cried until you got tired of crying, and then you got up and carried on with life. That's from page 42. And a quote from Shirley Flowers from her statement to the commission. The whole part of the residential school was a part of a bigger scheme of colonization. There was intent. The schools were there with the intent to change people, to make them like others, and to make them not fit. And today, you know, we have to learn to decolonize. That's from page 43.
Jen, Guy, Nao, Ellen, thank you. As mentioned earlier, yesterday would have been the 93rd birthday of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Last month, former South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu died at the age of 90. And with his passing, it seems to me that the world lost the last of a generation of prophetic voices dedicated to the betterment of human welfare for all. As someone who grew up steeped in the ideas espoused by the late Reverend Martin Luther King, I find myself incapable of not lifting up his profound dream on the Sunday closest to the day of his birth. And still, his and Desmond Tutu's work may be seen as some as dated, less relevant in today's world and climate. In short, and I know the summation may do injustice to the subtleties of their thinking and efforts, both prophetic leaders took human capability and dignity as both the means and the end of their visions. Both understood human dignity as a God-given truth and trust in human capability as our inherent promise. This morning, I want to pay homage to these prophets of love and justice, while also looking at the here and now, specifically the work of the Truth and Reconciliation in Canada has embarked upon. And as such, my reflections for you may prove wide-ranging this morning, even more so than usual. Are your seatbelts fastened? Let's start with Reverend Dr. King's legacy and his role in modern memory. 2 years ago, just over now, I asked a retired Methodist minister who, in his retirement, had begun attending the congregation I then served to preach on his experience as a young minister going to Selma, Alabama to march with Reverend Dr. King and others that fateful day. It was, for me at least, a bit of a mountaintop experience, if you'll pardon the pun, an inspiring account of living history. He talked about his conversations with his new wife then on whether or not he would go. He talked about the mood of the people on the march, the brotherhood and sisterhood, the possibility, the being a part of making history happen, not knowing what the outcome would be. He talked about his fears, his faith, his conviction, and what the experience taught him about what was possible when we choose to walk our talk. When he finished, there was applause, as was often the case in that congregation, but not everyone was moved. Two who had heard him asked me, "So, Reverend Eric, what did that have to do with the situation we're in today?" In response, my heart dropped. I felt like a teacher might when a student just doesn't get what seems so obvious. And yet, in many ways, it was a perfectly fair question. When I was studying denominational history in seminary, I learned, hearing of it for the first time in my life as a lifelong Unitarian, of what is often called the empowerment controversy, or what I call the disempowerment era. This was in the late 60s and early 70s, long before the Canadian Unitarian Council went its own way. The denomination had promised $1 million over 4 years to Black Unitarian groups for community development. And then, as it seems so often, a new denominational leadership came into power, new president was elected, and they looked at the finances and realized things weren't as rosy as their predecessor had said and led them to expect. So after the first year of that 4-year promise, funds were pulled. Reallocated may have been the term used at the time. In protest of this deferred promise, at the next denominational annual business meeting, half of the delegates from congregations throughout the continent walked out. Drama and heartache. In creating an oral history of those events, I interviewed a woman named Betty Reed Soskin, who had been an important player back then and who maintained her membership at one of our congregations not far from the seminary I attended. When she and I sat down to talk, it was in the autumn. She told me that the week before, she had received what had become an annual phone call from her church. They were asking if she would preach again that January at their annual Martin Luther King Memorial Service. That year, she told me, she had said no to that request for the first time. It's time they thought about what it might be not to have a Black person in their pulpit that day, she told me. I've never forgotten that lesson. This summer, it will be 59 years since Reverend King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. That's 2 whole generations. While I believe his address then and so much of what he says remains timely, calls to action need to be made relevant over and over and over again. Reverend Dr. King was one of those creations of history when the right person meets the given need of an age. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was another. With Nelson Mandela jailed for forays into violent expressions of the need for social justice and change, Tutu became a voice of conscience in a fractured South Africa. His leadership of that nation's truth and reconciliation process is an example for the ages. I think I've mentioned to you before that I spent a month in South Africa during 2003. I wanted to see how the truth and reconciliation there process, how it lived out 9 years after Mandela was elected president. I wanted to see what real lived work that process had done in South Africa. The highlight of the trip was guest preaching at a church in Soweto, the townships surrounding much of Johannesburg. I had been invited to preach the night before, so I didn't have all that long to prepare. Not knowing my audience, a Xhosa-speaking congregation, by anything more than reputation, I thanked them for the inspiration of their example, and then mused on what the world might have been if Martin Luther King Jr. had been able to meet, let alone work alongside Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela. It's important to remember that Nelson Mandela changed, by all accounts, he changed during his time in prison. When the international boycott of South African companies was being felt there, corporate and government leaders went to representatives of Mandela's African National Congress, who by and large chose not to negotiate them. But Mandela was willing to talk, and in doing so, he carved a middle way forward for the nation. And then Tutu, as that beacon of conscience, led the way for an open truth and reconciliation process there. In both Chile and Argentina, there had been truth commissions following the end of dictatorial rule, but those led more to victor's justice, and with the truth being compiled in private hearings behind doors. That would not work in South Africa, Tutu and others knew instinctively. So a process was created, one that provided that nation a new start. Of course, this would be a model for Canada, promising, if not a new nation, at least a new accountable era, one that might just provide long-needed healing. And while I trust that you will know the details of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, its report from 2015 is and remains a potential landmark. And the settlement agreed to in the final hours of last calendar year promises compensation to First Nation children and their family, and also long-term reform for the First Nations child welfare system. The $40 billion, even split between those uses, is not a trivial amount of money. And still, the devil will probably be found in the details. We'll have to see how all of this unfolds. But I have to pause here. $40 billion is an abstraction. The damages done by the residential schools here in Canada, as well as other nations, deserve to be seen as anything but abstractions. And there's also a personal connection I need to name. While I can't speak about it at any great length, I can only outline it because it's not my story to tell. It's part of the life of my larger family. You see, my wife, Anne, has an Indigenous Canadian nephew. His birth mother may have been one of those in a Canadian residential school. He was adopted into the family, in our family, as a baby. He's a grown man now, 45. After years of estrangement with his adopted family, Anne's family, my family, there have been efforts to reach out to one another recently. The work of healing and restoring connection is just beginning, but it's beginning. Like many cross-cultural adoptions, there were challenges and complexities, questions about belonging and identity. I can only imagine that, like so many things, hurt was never intended by anyone, but it was felt all the same. And with actions, there are also always consequences. Going back to the lessons from South Africa, one of the voices I found most helpful in understanding the complexities lived there is that of Antje Krog, a reporter. Well, she had been a reporter for the South African Broadcasting Company. Her book uncovering the truth and reconciliation work there is titled Country of My Skull. It was first published in 1999. She puts it this way: the two nations, white and black South Africa, are both affected, one by injury, the other by guilt. And the first reaction is to withdraw from one another. People withdraw physically or mental from each other after injury. A mother in front of the Truth Commission said that she did not want to even see a white person. Krog continues, people are leaving the country or pulling back into their own family or group spaces of language or history. Academics say that this withdrawal may last 1 second or for centuries, but that it is a necessary and healthy physical response. What I know is that damage done to our souls has lasting effects, and that such damage, just like each expression of kindness and love, leaves ripples in its wake. The full scope of the ripples felt by the Canadian residential school system will be impossible to quantify or accurately measure. Any settlement will not solve everything or heal the harms experienced over the generations, but it can be, and I pray it will be, a sign of hope. Intention does matter as long as lines of communication are possible. As Angie Krog states, withdrawal may be necessary, but only if it doesn't become a lasting state. Martin Luther King knew this. Desmond Tutu knew this. We have to remember the humanity of everyone and keep the respect for that in mind as our best and most trustworthy way forward. There's another story Angie Krog tells that has stayed with me ever since I first read it. I hope you'll appreciate it half as much as I have. She writes, "The deadline for amnesty application expires at midnight on Saturday, May 10th, 1997. Amnesty applications are still streaming in on Saturday morning, and when the offices close at midnight, the total number of applications received since the commission started work stands at about 7,700. My God, when we took on this job, we were told to expect about 200 applications, a member of the amnesty committee tells me with a shudder. And now there are over 7,000. Just before midnight, 6 Black youth walk into the Truth Commission's offices in Cape Town. They insist on filling out forms and taking the oath. Their application simply says, amnesty for apathy. They had been having a festive Saturday evening in a township bar when they started talking about the amnesty deadline and how millions of people had simply turned a blind eye to what was happening. It had been left to a few individuals to make the sacrifice for the freedom that everyone enjoys today. And that's when, they said, we decided to ask for amnesty because we had done nothing. They went to a nearby shop, asked the owner if they could use his computer, and typed out their amnesty for apathy, statement. But where does apathy fit into the act? A Truth Commission official asked them. They answered, the act says that an omission can also be a human rights violation. One of them quickly explained. And so that's what we did. We neglected to take part in the liberation struggle. So here we stand as a small group representative of millions of apathetic people who didn't do the right thing. Angie Krug continues, concluding, with applications like this, the amnesty process has become more than what was required by law. It has become the only forum where South Africans can say, we may not have committed a human rights abuse, but we want to say what we did or didn't do was wrong, and we're sorry. Young revelers getting serious for a bit. Maybe there is still reason for hope for our species. I hope that in the months and years to come, the situation here in Canada opens doors as well as hearts, like the reconciliation efforts did there in South Africa. But I need to be careful not to oversell or romanticize what took place there those years ago. That nation remains strained today at best. Systems that have been unbalanced for generations do not even themselves out overnight. And as imperfect as efforts as they will be, the efforts to do so are worth the best in us. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, by not dealing with past human right violations, we are not simply protecting the perpetrator's trivial old age. We are hereby ripping the foundations of justice from beneath new generations. As far as I'm concerned, we've seen more than enough of that over the years. It's time, high time, for new beginnings. I hope that in time, Canada's truth and reconciliation work will prove an example of just that. Now, I began talking this morning about Martin Luther King and gave an example of how some of what he achieved wasn't fully appreciated these days. Well, let me leave you now with a counterexample. When Ava DuVernay's film Selma was in theaters a few years back, we led a field trip for our congregation's coming of age class to see the movie. The students, its teachers and mentors. Only one of the youth had seen the movie before, so I asked her what she had to say to the rest who are about to see it for the first time. Without missing a beat, Rowan replied, "It's okay to cry." That message that was not received by the man reporting to Canada's Reconciliation Commission. In the face of human tragedy, it is okay, if not necessary, to cry. Compassion, suffering with, that's the start. Showing others you see their pain. Of course, that's only the start, as Martin Luther King said the summer before he was shot down. And I'm sure you've heard this 100 times, but you know, it's worth it to hear it 101. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So we remember, we honor. May we also reinstill both the wisdom and dreams of the past with the urgency and demands of the present day. To forget would rob us of hard-won wisdom, yet to remember and bring that wisdom forward, that's the work required of us. The American poet Langston Hughes has a poem from which I took the title of this talk with you, in which he asks, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Now that's a rather American perspective. So let's focus on the part before that last line. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up, fester, or sag? What I'm learning about Canada is that you, despite injustice, keep coming back to the table to say, you know, we need something different. We need something better. Let's talk. Phyllis Jack Webster told her story about the orange shirt her grandmother gave her to wear on her first day of school, a shirt that was deemed unfitting, taken from her and never returned. I don't know how many times she had to tell that story. I don't know how long she may have needed to withdraw from contact with settler Canadians. What I do know is that at some point, she made the decision to continue telling her story, to keep speaking her truth with love and conviction to power. A simple story in many ways, but one that resonates still. A story of trauma and remembering. A story asking for a better day. And a movement was born. The outcome of that movement is still unfolding. This morning, I've talked about people you've heard of before: Martin Luther King Jr., Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Phyllis Jack Webster. I'd like to close now with a short poem from someone I wager is new to you, the South African poet Oswald Machali. This is his poem, Walls. Please note that Mtasale's language is more gender-based than we might prefer today, but altering it lessens the impact of his message. So I've chosen to bring it to you as it was written. Please forgive the gender bias here. Walls. Man is a great wall builder. The Berlin Wall, the Wailing Wall of Jerusalem, but the wall most impregnable has a moat flowing with fright around his heart. A wall without windows for the spirit to breeze through, a wall without a door for love to walk in. Thankfully, we have the voices of many who have come before, and many who are with us still to help guide us as we try to carry the ripples of justice, kindness, and love forward evermore. Thank you. Blessed be. Amen. And now, Music Jen will introduce our morning's anthem. Jen?
Thank you, Eric. This morning's anthem is Peace Song by Greg Gilpin, and it will be performed by Chalice Choir. This song also integrates and pays homage to We Shall Overcome, which of course has a very long history as a protest song used all over the world for many different causes, but it is most closely associated with the civil rights movement. It was an unofficial anthem of the movement and was even recited by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his last sermon that he ever delivered 4 days before his assassination. So it's a very appropriate one for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Music Jen, and thank you, Chalice Choir, for that lovely song. And thank you, Reverend Eric, for a very moving and inspirational sermon. I take your call to action to heart. During the continuing pandemic, we rely on your generosity as much as ever. Wherever and whenever you are watching this, you are invited to go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how you might keep up with your pledge or to make a donation. Our gifts are given freely and they are gratefully received. We dedicate these gifts to the work of this community of faith, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another. And now, our closing hymn, Wo Ya Ya.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be mighty and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. We-ya-ya, 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 we-ya-ya. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. We-ya-ya, 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 we-ya-ya,
Thanks again, Jen. Lovely, lovely rendition of that beautiful song. Before we close this time of worship and reflection, a reminder that in lieu of our hospitality hour today, a town hall conversation on our campus plans will begin at 11:30. I hope you will all join me and take part. We extinguish our chalice this morning to words from Maya Angelou. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon the day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. This morning, its chalice is extinguished, but our connections and faith remain. With that said, Jen, will you please bless us again?
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise
Thank you, Jen. And as we are once again worshiping hither and yon this morning, this pandemic diaspora required of all the world, reach out your hands. We can still be connected with one another and with our neighbors, sharing this beautiful, much in need of improvement, but beautiful, beautiful world. Go in peace, go in love, go in joy. And may we know in our hearts that all will be well. But don't go far or too quickly. We have an important town hall today. First, Jen has a bit more music for us, and there'll be music again between now and the town hall at 11:30. Jen, postlude.